the different ways to becoming an heir of an estate according to the laws of the state of Israel. That's what I'm going to explain about now. Basically, there are two ways to be an heir. One is by law, and the other one is through a will. If you go by law, then you basically need to abide by the inheritance law in Israel from 1965. In the inheritance law, we basically have an order of heirs. The order basically goes like this. You first have the spouse. The spouse will basically inherit all the joint possessions in the joint property that she lived with, or he lived with their spouse in, and the vehicle. And after those assets, basically, then the spouse will usually will inherit also a portion of the rest of the estate. Usually it will be half, sometimes it will be more. So after we deal with the spouse and we put him or her aside, we have an order of parental lines. In Hebrew, parentelot. So I think in English the best definition is parental lines, and you have 3 orders of parental lines. When you exhaust each order, you go to the next order. So the first order of a parental line is the children and the descendants. And the second order is, if there are no children and descendants, you go to the second order. It will be the parents and the descendants. If there are no parents or descendants, you go to the third parental order, which are the parents of the parents and their descendants, meaning the grandparents and their descendants. So if someone has a spouse, and let's say children, then the spouse basically will first get all the joint assets in the apartment house they lived in and the vehicle, and then the rest of the estate will be split half between the spouse and half between the children and all the descendants. If the person that's deceased has parents and no children and descendants, then the spouse will inherit the joint possessions in the vehicle, half of the estate, and the half will go to the parents. If there are no parents and there are only siblings, meaning descendants of the second parental line, the parents, then the spouse will inherit 2/3 of the rest of the estate after the joint possessions in the house and the vehicle, and the siblings will need to split the other third between themselves. So these are basically the 3 parental lines and the spouse that we discussed now in the list and order of heirs according to law. However, the law doesn't necessarily deal with all the situations that exist. The legislator tried his best basically to understand what most people want, but naturally every person might have his own preferences, and it's impossible to deal with every scenario. For example, I will give the most extreme scenario as one, but there are many scenarios where you will see that a will is definitely something you should have. If we're dealing with an elderly couple that has no children, their parents aren't alive and their grandparents aren't alive, and there may be descendants of their grandparents that they don't even know about and they never even met maybe. So those descendants are actual heirs, and I presume that this elderly couple with no children don't want to bequeath whatever they have to people they don't know at all. So naturally a couple like this would want to have a will. That's an extreme example, but there are many examples. So we do definitely recommend that you prepare a will so that after you pass away, your estate will be bequeathed to people of your choice. It can be basically anyone, and it can be even an institution or an official legal entity, which can be an organization, a company, a non-profit, usually a fund, or anything like that. There are 4 types of wills basically that exist. There's a verbal will, there is a written will, there's a will by witnesses, and there's a will before a court, which can also be before a notary. It's also very important to note, if you have assets in Israel and overseas, to make sure you contact a lawyer that's an expert both in the country, in each country where you have assets, so you make sure it's an easy process afterwards to obtain an order to implement the will. I hope that this information was helpful. If you have any further questions, you can feel free to contact us. Thank you very much for your time.